Alright, welcome to lesson 4 here. This lesson we look at culture. You can see on the screen I've got a lot of stuff going on here. We're going to cover just a little bit of this to kind of get you started on this week's reading and reviewing. So let me start with what culture is. We talk a lot about culture this, culture that, a culture, and society. So let me separate the two. A culture are the beliefs and values that a group share. Another way of thinking of it is it's what we have in common. So when you look at American culture, you can look at what beliefs and values do Americans share. So just as a quick example, some core beliefs here that Americans share is a belief in democracy, a belief in freedom, a belief in individuality, a belief in hard work. So there's a lot of these sort of core beliefs and values, and so a group that shares these beliefs and values would be a culture, like American culture, or Japanese culture, or a tribal culture. There's lots of cultures around the world. Now, a society is made up of people who share a community and a culture. So in other words, a society, American society, would be people who live in the United States. That's what it means by sharing a community, live in a certain place, and they share a culture. Of course, there's also smaller groups of culture or smaller groups of society, and we can go all the way up to sort of the national level. So just wanted to kind of get you set up here for what culture is. So let's take a look here at some of these core beliefs related to sociology and culture. First, I have a question up here that says, what is normal? What is normal? And take a look here at this image, and do you think this is normal? And I mean, is it normal by American cultural standards? And if you look at this individual, many of you might be inclined to say, no, that's not normal. That's not normal. Now, let me be clear on this. When sociologists use the term normal or not normal, we're not using it sort of in a good or bad sort of way. What we're describing is something socially acceptable. We're not saying that if something's not normal, it's bad, or something that's normal is good, right? Because you could live in a society where something like rape would be normal. That doesn't make it, of course, good, but it does make it sort of normal in that society. So we don't use normal in terms of being good or bad. But either way, this individual right here, you might be inclined to say, is not normal in our society. And why would that be? I mean, think about that for a second. What makes this individual abnormal in our society? What rules is he breaking, or norms, if you will? Is it tattoos? Tattoos have become very normal in our society as far as people having tattoos. So it's not tattoos specifically, but what you might realize, or you might think is abnormal, is he crossed sort of this barrier. In our society, tattooing your face is sort of the something that's still not widely acceptable. So this is what makes him out of the norm in our society. Now, if you take a look at this guy, same question. Do you think this is normal? The answer to this, if you're not aware of this, this culture comes from one of the Polynesian cultures. This is normal. This is normal in his culture. In fact, males are given these face tattoos when they transition into adulthood. So, in fact, if someone a male walked around without a face tattoo in this culture, they would be seen as abnormal. People would wonder, what's wrong with this person? Did he never enter manhood? Did he never enter adulthood? Normal is relevant based upon the culture that you live in. So what's normal in one culture is certainly not normal in other cultures. I also want to look at this idea here of culture shock and ethnocentrism. If an individual goes to another society, visits another place where they have a different culture, it's very typical that that person will experience what we call culture shock. Culture shock is when the rules or norms that you're used to don't work anymore. So if you're in an entirely different environment, those rules and norms may not work. I found this when I've been in many places, one of them Korea, Saudi Arabia. In both of these places, I found that when I got there, you just sort of feel like you really, in some ways, don't fit in because you don't understand the rules. You don't understand how that society operates. Of course, over time, you get used to it and you kind of figure it out, but that's culture shock. What the temptation for people to do, many people, in fact, it may be sort of somewhat almost a natural inclination, not natural good, but just it seems to be what people do, is something called ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is when you value or try to judge other cultures based on your own culture's rules. So if you look at another culture and you instantly say, oh, they're weird, they're crazy, I don't know why the hell they're doing something like that, that's an example of ethnocentrism. So when you look around the world and you see that they don't do things exactly the same as you, and you judge them as less than you because of that, right? Because you're using your rules to judge them. So this is something you should be aware of, because ethnocentrism usually leads to a lot of problems. Now, the other sort of side of this is something we call cultural relativism. This is the goal of scientists, sociologists, anthropologists when they research other cultures or their own culture. But cultural relativism means that you try to understand other cultures based upon their own rules. In other words, you try to figure out why they do the things they do based upon their own norms or their own rules in their society. This is no society does something because they think it's crazy. Right? No society is sitting there going, wow, we're crazy for doing this. All societies have a set of rules or assumptions that make their own culture make sense. So in cultural relativism, as our goal as sociologists, and your goal is when you're looking at other cultures, should be to try to understand from their own perspective why they do the things they do. And that's cultural relativism. So I want to show you here some of the sort of keys here on what makes up culture. So I'm going to show you a few things here. We're not going to cover everything, so you're going to have to go to that book. But I just kind of wanted to show you this. There are different parts of culture. Remember, I said cultures are beliefs and values. And so I want to just kind of lay out the different parts of culture. So you see on the screen here, one type or part of culture is what we call material culture. Material culture is that culture you can see, you can feel it. So a culture is often made up of a certain type of art. That could be music, it could be physical art, it could be any type of art. Cultures also have, at least historically, they used to have their own types of weapons and machines. And buildings. So if you looked around and can think of a really different culture, you would have seen all of these things. Now that the world is more connected, things like weapons and machines, and to a certain degree even buildings, aren't as different as they used to be. So where we really see the differences in culture is in that non-material culture. So non-material culture means non-physical culture. So this is where we get to those beliefs and values. And so I wanted to show you values are the things that your culture holds as most important, right? So when we talk about values, we're talking about those things that everyone sort of believes in your culture, and your culture just views these as so important, even if they aren't, you don't know them necessarily. I mean, that is, you inherently know these things, but you may not actually be able to list all of these. So this is a list of core American values that have been sort of compiled over the years. And so these are the things that Americans tend to believe in. Now, I want to point one out because, you'll see over here on some of these, you'll see things like equality over here in the right-hand corner, and then right below it, you see racism or group superiority. Now, the reason that one's on there is because we see that racism and group superiority is something that's happened in the United States over and over and over and over again, whether it was with the original colonizers coming and treating Native Americans, the enslavement of African Americans, but this is something that's existed for a long term in our society. Now, the hope is that, of course, that values like equality and freedom and individualism will eventually overtake racism and group superiority, and this value will eventually disappear from American society. So that's sort of the hope, but I just wanted to explain why that was on there. Okay, so values are important. Additionally, norms are important too, and norms are those rules in your society. So if you want to think of one word definition of norms, they're just rules. Some rules are like folkways. That's a type of norm. A folkway is a type of norm. That's just an everyday rule. And what I mean is things like manners, saying please, shaking someone's hand at a meeting. No one's going to arrest you if you break that norm. Running down the hallway in school. Someone might look at you, give you a funny look. Someone may tell you to slow down. But no, you're not going to get arrested. But these are just the everyday rules. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of these that we all follow without really thinking about it. On the other hand, we have mores. Mores, spelled like this but pronounced mores, are those norms related to those core values. These are the things we think are very, very important. You should never break a more, is what we would say in our society. And we think that mores are so important that we tend to write these down formally. So these also become laws. So, for example, murdering someone, that's a more in our society. You don't do it. Stealing, anything that's written down into a law is typically a more. The most extreme example of a norm is what we call a taboo. These are sort of the ultimate no-nos in society, even worse in some ways than murder. And what it is you do not want to, people don't even like to think about these things. They're so outside the norm or so unusual. And so some of the classic taboos in society would be cannibalism, for example. Just kind of makes you don't even like to think about that it could ever happen. Child molestation, having sex with children is another example of a taboo. It certainly happens, but people don't even like to think that it could happen because it seems just so wrong, even at a level beyond murder or something. So those are examples of taboos. Another one would be incest, having sex with family members, another taboo in our society. So that's part of our culture as well, those norms. I do want to mention these symbols that make up our non-material culture. And one of the most important aspects of a non-material culture, and this goes with symbolic interactionism, are symbols. And we have symbols, things like gestures, which are sort of physical. That is, you can see a hand signal or something would be a gesture. And most important of our symbols is actually language. Right? Language. And so language is this type of symbol in which information is stored in these small things we call words. So languages, of course, differ from culture to culture, and those languages actually help determine how we see the world. That's the notion behind the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So this is all very important parts of our culture. Now, what happens when someone breaks rules? Someone breaks those rules or norms of their culture. Well, your culture will sanction you. Your culture is going to sanction you. So a sanction is essentially, it can be a punishment or it can be a reward. So this is how a culture keeps control of its people. So there are positive sanctions, and positive sanctions are actually rewards for following the norms. You might be able to think of some examples of this. If you do a good job, if you follow the rules, what are some rewards you could get? If you're a little kid in the classroom, you might get a star. If you're a worker and you're following the rules and doing a good job, you might get a raise or a promotion. Those would be positive sanctions. They are rewards for following the rules. On the other hand, negative sanctions are punishments for breaking those norms or rules. Negative sanction could be anything from someone giving you an ugly look or honking the horn when you cut them off in traffic. That would be a negative sanction, all the way up to being put in prison, or even in our society, potentially the death penalty, taking your life away, could be a negative sanction. So that's that for this. I just wanted to give you a basic introduction. In your book, it's going to talk a lot more about things like real culture versus ideal culture. You're going to see some talk about subcultures and pop culture. So you're going to want to focus in on those. But hopefully this little introduction gave you sort of a brief sort of start to what is culture and society, and how do sociologists deal with it. All right. So once again, have a great week here. Get that work done, and be sure to take note of all the due dates and get everything done on time. Remember, the Start Here folder has that course schedule or course calendar, which you can print off, and it should be sitting next to your computer so you don't ever miss anything. All right. Have a great week.